Thank you for joining us on this short course covering worker exposure to silica during countertop manufacturing, finishing, and installation. OSHA and NIOSH have identified exposure to silica as a health hazard to workers involving manufacturing, finishing, and installing natural and manufactured stone countertop products, both in fabrication shops and during in-home finishing and installation. This hazard alert focuses on countertop industry worker exposures to airborne silica dust, including from quartz and stone. It covers the health effects of breathing silica dust, recommend ways to protect workers, and describes how OSHA and NIOSH can help employers effectively reduce silica dust exposures, because employers must ensure that workers are properly protected from exposure to silica in the workplace. Workers involved in manufacturing, finishing, and installing natural and manufactured stone countertops are at risk for significant crystalline silica exposure. Crystalline silica commonly occurs in nature as the mineral quartz and is found in granite, sandstone, quartzite, various other rocks, and sand. Workers who inhale very small crystalline silica particles are at risk for silicosis, which is an incurable, progressively disabling, and sometimes fatal lung disease. Silicosis results in permanent lung damage. Silica dust particles become trapped in lung tissue, causing inflammation and scarring and reducing the lung's ability to take in oxygen. Symptoms of silicosis can include shortness of breath, cough, and fatigue, and may or may not be obviously attributable to silica. Workers exposed to airborne crystalline silica also are at increased risk for lung cancer, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, that is COPD, and kidney disease. OSHA and NIOSH investigated U.S. worker exposure to respirable crystalline silica in the stone countertop industry following reports from other countries of stone countertop workers developing silicosis. In at least some cases, workers were exposed in shops operating without dust suppression and without respiratory protection. While the stone industry in the United States has worked to implement dust controls to protect workers against the dangers of silica exposure, studies and OSHA inspections indicate that exposure levels may not be adequately controlled in some stone countertop fabrication work sites in the United States. Stone industry workers in shops and on job sites throughout the United States saw, grind, polish, and drill slabs of natural, mostly granite, and manufactured, that is man-made, engineered, or cultured stone as part of manufacturing, finishing, and installing countertops. Granite and other natural stones are quarried and cut into large stone slabs where exposure to crystalline silica dust is likely. These slabs are further cut to countertop sizes at the quarries or at some finishing shops. Manufactured stone countertop production, that is actually making the engineered or cultured slabs, this involves mixing crystalline silica, some resins, and pigments to get the final product. So why is silica a concern for workers in stone countertop manufacturing, finishing, and installation? Well, stone countertops contain high amounts of the natural mineral silica. The finished, natural, and manufactured stone products, including finished countertops, do not present a health hazard themselves. However, any cutting, grinding, sanding, and polishing of these products can release hazardous levels of crystalline silica dust particles into the air that workers may then possibly breathe in. Depending upon the type of stone in question, countertops may contain over 90% silica. The highest silica levels are associated with manufactured countertops, where pigments and adhesives comprise the remaining materials. Silica content is generally lower in natural stone products. Calcium-based stones, including limestone and certain varieties of marble, contain little or no silica. In contrast, granite can contain up to 45 to 50% silica. The table shown gives the typical silica and quartz content of common natural and engineered stones. Note that silica and quartz content will vary among stone varieties, and the exact content can be determined by petrographic and X-ray diffraction analysis on each rock. Workers operating powered hand tools such as saws, grinders, and high-speed polishers have some of the highest silica dust exposures in the countertop manufacturing, finishing, and installation industries. These exposures come from dry cutting, grinding, edging, and contouring stone, and may occur in shop environments as well as on job sites where finishing work is completed. In the manufactured stone industry, workers may also be exposed to silica dust when opening bags of ground quartz, moving or mixing bulk raw materials, cleaning and scraping mixers, or cleaning dust collector baghouses. Workers performing other tasks in areas close to where silica dust generating operations occur may also be exposed. Without proper engineering controls such as water sprays or local exhaust ventilation and personal protective equipment where appropriate, workers can inhale silica-containing dust from these operations. Employers are responsible for providing safe and healthful working conditions for their workers. Employers must determine which jobs and activities expose workers to silica and take actions to control overexposures and protect workers. The first thing that needs to be done is determine worker exposure to silica. This can be accomplished by collecting respirable crystalline silica dust samples to determine which jobs expose workers to silica above exposure limits. Employers should consult with a trained occupational safety and health professional, such as a certified industrial hygienist, or contact OSHA's free on-site consultation program, KYC. If air samples show levels above OSHA's permissible exposure limit, employers are required to take action to reduce worker exposures to below the PEL. The OSHA general industry PEL for respirable silica is 50 micrograms per cubic meter air as an 8-hour time-weighted average. Engineering controls and work practices provide the best protection for workers and must be implemented first before respiratory protection is used. Some engineering controls identified by NIOSH and OSHA are using water spraying systems and remote control tools at the impact site where saw or grinder generates dust. You can use large bridge or gantry-like saws, usually use water sprays and can be remote controlled for dust control and cooling. Handheld angle grinders can be modified to deliver water to the point of contact with the stone. Wet edge milling machines or stone routers can replace dry grinders in shops. They provide a clean edge profile with a diamond wheel. Or you can use hand tools equipped with a shroud and vacuum with a high efficiency particulate air filter when wet methods are not practical. Or install local exhaust ventilation systems at fixed locations to capture dust at its point of origin, or use a combination of both water and ventilation controls if necessary. For work practice controls, employers can use methods of wet sweeping or HEPA filtered vacuuming instead of dry sweeping or compressed air. Replace water and air filters as needed to control dust. You can adjust water flow as necessary to control dust, following manufacturers' recommendations for water flow rates. Pre-washing stone slabs prior to cutting. Implement regular and thorough housekeeping procedures for water slurry and settled dust. In high exposure areas, such as where cutting or polishing work generates silica dust, provide HEPA filtered vacuums for cleaning workers' clothes and water for hand, face, and hair cleaning. And further, you need to identify and isolate remaining dust generating operations. You can accomplish this through air monitoring, identify high exposure activities associated with countertop finishing operations. These likely involve angle grinding or other types of grinding and cutting with saws. You also need to isolate the silica dust producing operations using enclosures or walls. Enclosures are more effective when used with local exhaust ventilation, or alternatively enclose the person if possible by putting him or her in a control booth. In some severe cases, it may be necessary to isolate some finishing tasks in separate areas. This may be needed more frequently for manufactured stone because of its high silica content. For installation operations in commercial and residential spaces, you want to try and do as much work as possible under controlled shop conditions instead of on site, or perform work outdoors or in well-ventilated areas to reduce respirable crystalline silica dust exposure. Wet methods for dust control may not be practical on or near finished cabinets, walls, and floors, so other suppressions, such as local exhaust ventilation, should be used during these operations. And using grinding and drilling tools equipped with dust shrouds coupled with local exhaust ventilation and HEPA filter, controls can be either tool mounted like drills or attached to a vacuum system. And then use a HEPA filter vacuum to clean up dust as soon as practical. The Natural Stone Institute, or NSI technical module, Silicosis, an industry guide to awareness and prevention, offers tips on controlling silica exposures in stone cutting operations. It is available to workers and employers on the NSI website, and other resources can be found from NSI at naturalstoneinstitute.org. When engineering and work practice controls do not limit silica exposures to OSHA's Pell, employers must provide workers with respirators. Whenever respirators are required, the employer must have a respiratory protection program that meets the requirements of OSHA's respiratory protection standard. This program must include proper respirator selection, fit testing, medical evaluations, and training. If respirators are provided, use at least a NIOSH approved N95 respirator. If the silica level is more than 10 times the Pell, a half-face respirator is not protective enough, and a respirator that offers a greater level of protection, such as a full face piece respirator that will protect workers at silica levels up to 50 times the Pell, must be used. Powered air purifying respirators, PAPRs, also provide more protection than half-face air purifying respirators. In general, workers find PAPRs to be more comfortable than pressure demand respirators, including tight-fitting elastomeric varieties. Data from OSHA and NIOSH air monitoring and other published studies provide estimates of countertop industry worker exposure to airborne crystalline silica. In most countertop manufacturing, finishing, and installation operations, engineering controls and proper work practices are generally effective in reducing worker exposures to the OSHA Pell and the NIOSH REL. Respiratory protection may still be necessary to protect workers in some cases, however. Studies conducted by OSHA and NIOSH have shown that samples taken when dry cutting stone have results that vary between 40 and 770 micrograms per cubic meter. And while employing wet methods to control this dust exposure show a reduction in employee exposure, the results of some studies conducted by OSHA during special emphasis program inspections found a mean result of exposure at 61 micrograms per cubic meter of air. This average is above OSHA's Pell. Where a water feed to a saw alone is not sufficient, spraying the stone before cutting it or between multiple cuts can further reduce exposures. In one operation where workers used wet sawing, they were still exposed to average silica concentrations above the Pell. Using these added controls resulted in exposures below the 50 microgram per cubic meter Pell. The addition of local exhaust ventilation in the shop further reduced these exposures. OSHA is here to help. KY Safe, through the Kentucky Education and Labor Cabinet, offer free on-site confidential consultative visits, and this would include free exposure monitoring to determine employee exposure to silica, as well as other airborne contaminants, and noise exposure monitoring. Call today to schedule your free on-site consultative visit. Thank you.